Before the torch was lit, there was only darkness so complete it pressed against the skin like wet cloth. Beneath the ziggurat, where the air hung thick with centuries of ash and the bitter musk of old incense, a boy trembled. He was naked, save for braided cords at his wrists and ankles, sacred twine anointed with myrrh and oxblood. He had not spoken in 3 days. He had not eaten in 6 days. The stone beneath him was cold, older than memory, older perhaps than time. It whispered as he shifted, murmuring in cracks and sighs, as if the underworld itself took breath. Above him, unseen, vast miles of city lay sleeping or pretending to sleep, while priests in linen robes stirred with purpose. The silence before the rite was the silence of judgment, not the mercy of gods, but the weighing of stars. Fate in Babylon was not earned. It was read, it was written, and it was inescapable. And here, in the bowels of the sacred, a boy waited for his body to be made into a bridge of pain, of purity, of blood. No name would remain. His name had already been stripped in the Hall of Rites, replaced with a number inscribed in clay. But he would become known, not to the people, not to the scribes, but to Marduk, to Enlil, to the Star Lords who fed on sacrifice and wove order from agony. He was 13, virgin, chosen. The darkness cradled him like a mouth preparing to close. The shadows stretched like limbs of the divine, and somewhere far above, a priest inhaled deeply. Fire was brought to wick. Smoke curled into the ceiling of the temple. The torch was lit. And the rite began. To the world, Babylon was splendor. Her walls, thick enough for chariots to race abreast. Her gardens, so lush they defied the desert's scorn. Her ziggurats clawed at the sun. Yet beneath the marble, the lapis lazuli, and the golden statues that shimmered in the heat of the Mesopotamian plain, Babylon was a city of order, cosmic, cruel, and unyielding. To live in Babylon was to breathe a universe structured by divine will. Every act, every breath, every drop of oil burned in the sacred basins was a mirror of the heavens. It was not merely a city, it was the axis between earth and stars. At its heart stood the Esthagila, the great temple of Marduk, god of judgment, king of gods. Here the calendar was born. Here omens were read in sheep entrails, eclipses were noted, and wars were either sanctioned or forbidden. To defy the temple was to fracture the world itself. The gods Marduk, Ishtar, Nabu, Shamash were not distant beings. They lived through rite and blood, fed by flame and silence. Their hungers were complex, but one offering had always been especially potent: purity, and purity, in Babylonian law, meant untouched flesh. Virginity was not merely moral, it was sacred matter, an alchemical key. Male virginity, rare and potent, was considered a vessel of perfect offering. It contained the seed of life unrealized. Its blood was uncorrupted. Its fear, unsullied by guilt or passion, was pure fuel for invocation. The priests of Babylon were not simply clergy. They were cosmic engineers, trained from childhood in the sciences of astronomy, medicine, math, and incantation. They saw themselves as surgeons of fate, the Levitical priests who tended the sacred fires, and the Chaldeans masters of the starshed. A single doctrine: balance must be paid in flesh. When drought threatened the crops, when pestilence devoured the herds, or when foreign armies darkened the horizon, the cry went out for purity. And beneath the stars, boys were sought. Temples were not houses of worship as we understand them. They were machines. Every chamber, statue, corridor, and chant had been carved to reflect celestial harmonies, and in their deepest sancta, far from the light of the sun, sacrifices were prepared not in haste or cruelty, but in precision, because only exact suffering opened certain gates. It began with the stars, always the stars. Chaldean. Astrologers, perched atop the ziggurat's crown, scanned the skies nightly. When Jupiter crossed Saturn beneath a moon veiled in smoke, when dogs birthed litters in silence, or when the liver of a newborn lamb showed twin lobes, the omens aligned. The gods had spoken. They demanded a vessel. The temple scribes took their styluses to clay, recording the signs. The hunt began. Babylon's census was more than taxes. It recorded bloodlines, virginities, and sins. Every boy of noble or priestly descent was marked from birth, and when the signs were ripe, inspectors roamed the city in silence. They bore tablets with lists of candidates, and faces hidden behind gold-threaded veils. Families with sons under 15 would bolt doors, hide their children in cellars, or offer bribes to delay inspection. But it was useless. To refuse the gods was death, and to defile a virgin boy, to render him unworthy and ancient, desperate tactic, was punishable by flaying. When they came to your house, they brought no blades, only eyes. The examinations were invasive. Boys were stripped, inspected for marks, scars, hidden circumcision. Their sleep and habits were questioned. Was he chaste? Had he dreamt of women? Had he ever touched blood? Did he stammer at sacred words? And then, the worst came. The marking, the chosen, were taken to the house of selection. There, in silence, their names were burned from clay. Each was given a new tableton marked, save for an astrological sigil. They were no longer citizens, no longer sons. They were Shelah-Marduk, he who is offered to Marduk. Some we remember only through shattered records. A boy from Borsippa, son of a merchant, taken at 11. Another from Nipper, already studying arithmetic. Most were from priestly lineages, made to preserve bloodlines, to appease the stars. One boy, whose diary was partially preserved, wrote, "My father wept and shaved his beard. My mother did not touch me. They gave me to the priests as one gives meat to the flame. My name was taken, and I was clothed in white. I was told this is a great honor. But I could not stop shaking." He was 12. He would not survive the week. Purity is not enough. Purity must be proved. And then, purity must be broken. Once chosen, the boys were taken to the Temple of Shadows, so-called not in metaphor, but in truth. Its walls were black stone, obsidian, and bitumen, and no sunlight ever touched its inner halls. Here began the ritual preparations. 7 days, 7 steps, 7 deaths of the self. First came fasting. No food, no water, only sacred milk on the first day soured with ash and herbs. By the 3rd day, the boys could no longer stand. That was when the binding began. Their bodies were shaved completely. Hair was burned in sacred braziers. Their genitals were bound in cords soaked in juniper oil and goat's blood twisted tightly enough to cause swelling, sometimes rupture. They were told this preserved the sanctity of their seed. In truth, it made movement agony. Priests whispered constantly. Scripture, litany, cosmic equations. The boys were not allowed to sleep. Any sign of collapse was met with sacred needle-still bone instruments pricked into souls and tongues to revive them. On the 5th night, narcotics were administered. The black lotus, mold from sacred caves, ashes from ancient fires. The boys began to hallucinate visions of winged beasts, of fathers burning, of being swallowed by stars. These were considered divine signs, proof that gods were beginning to speak through them. Then came the oaths, written in blood and carved into clay. Each boy pressed his finger into wax and swore he would submit, that his pain would be holy, that he offered his body not to man, but to the gods. Some tried to run. One leaped from a temple balcony and broke his legs. He was dragged back in silence. No priest shouted. No punishment was declared, only more silence, more binding. The final act of preparation was the naming of the wound. Each boy was told which god he would serve in death: Marduk, Nergal, Ishtar. A symbol was cut into his thigh, a glyph in the language of stars. Blood flowed. The god was pleased. Then, they were ready. No longer children, not yet corpses. They were flesh suspended in divine intent. The inner sanctum of a Sagila was not built for men, it was built for gods. You entered not through doors, but through descent. Spiraling steps carved into black stone wound downward, beneath the ziggurat's towering form. As you descended, light disappeared. The air changed cooler, thicker, saturated with the scent of ancient oil and myrrh. Walls closed in. Torches were forbidden in certain passages. Instead, priests carried glowing stones in bowls of mercury. Light shimmered without flame, casting long, unsteady shadows. The soundscape was unbearable. Not noise, but the absence of it. Breath echoed, footsteps doubled back like whispers. In certain halls, a single cough could return like thunder. The ritual chamber itself was an abomination of geometry. Neither round nor square, but something else, an octagon within a dome. Angles that pulled the eye and made balance impossible. Scholars now suspect it was built to mimic star charts designed to draw celestial power. At the center stood the altar. A slab of volcanic glass, polished to such a shine the boy could see his reflection. He had not seen his face in days. Around the altar stood statues, towering, gold-plated, faceless. Each held a weapon: dagger, sickle, staff, rope, representations of gods in their aspect of judgment. The boy, now called only the vessel, was led in blindfolded. Priests sang in a tongue no longer spoken, an Akkadian so ancient it had become prayer by phonetics alone. The boy's feet were washed. Oil was poured down his spine. Then silence. The priesthood circled him. The high priest, known only as the Mouth placed a dagger at the boy's navel. The gods were summoned, and the rite commenced. Asterisk. The gods did not want life. They wanted transformation. What happened next was not execution, it was unmaking. The boy was not simply killed. He was converted from flesh to symbol, from innocence to power. His suffering was an alphabet in which gods wrote answers. The first cut was never lethal. It was ceremonial, with obsidian blades cold and sharp enough to sever nerve without spurting blood. The priests opened the skin of the inner thigh, a line drawn from knee to groin, shallow, precise. This was not disfigurement, but declaration. The flesh has been opened to the divine. Blood was caught in silver bowls. A priest, trained in reading blood's motion, would swirl it slowly and watch the way it clung to the rim. Omens were taken from its weight, its clotting. Then came the binding of seed. In some rite. The boy's genitals were left intact but rendered inert, compressed until they turned dark, pulseless. In others, small incisions were made into the scrotum, blood drawn deliberately. Castration was rare but not unheard of. More often, a symbolic emasculation was performed. A ritual thread passed through the foreskin, yanked taut, and burned away with flame. Pain was integral, not as punishment but as language. The screams, the silence that followed, the trembling, each was noted by the priests. Each marked stages of divine descent. They believed the gods could only hear through agony. The divine marriage followed. This was the cruelest rite. The boy, still conscious, was made to lie on his back before a statue, usually Marduk or Shamashand. His body was anointed with scented oils. Priests would chant, dressing him in thin silks, calling him the bride of fire. Then, a priest selected by lot or legacy would climb upon the altar and symbolically unite with the boy. In most interpretations, this union was not penetrative, but intimate, mouth to mouth, palm to chest, groin to groin. In others, more brutal accounts, there are records of the boy being used, fully seen, as a channel through which divine power could be summoned. But in all cases, the boy was emptied of himself. The probing came next. A bronze instrument, curved like a question mark, was inserted rectally. Priests claimed to be reading omens from the shape and warmth of internal organs. Some believed this practice was linked to early forms of divination reserved for animals, but here, the human body was both temple and lamb. By now most boys were unconscious. Some begged, some had stopped responding entirely. Their blood was painted onto the pillars in spirals. Hair was cut and burned, mixed with cedar and offered to the flames. The method of death varied. Some were drowned in thick cloths soaked in sacred oil, wrapped tight like mummies and submerged until lungs surrendered. Others were suffocated with perfumed ash poured into the mouth and nose. Still others were strangled slowly, ritually, with cords of dyed linen. While the priest whispered forgiveness. There are two known accounts of burial while still breathing. One fragment from Nippur describes the closing of the chamber, where the boy was sealed into a small stone room with incense and a torch, left to the gods. The scratching on the walls cut with fingernails was later preserved in rubbings. The final act was naming. The priests placed the boy's clay tablet on the altar, broke it in two, and buried half with the body. The other half was placed into the temple archive. He no longer had a name, but he had served. He had become useful. He had become. Babylon never announced the boy's death. Instead, on the seventh day after the ritual, drums were sounded from the highest tower. A single wail echoed across the city, the tears of the sky. The people knew what it meant. A sacrifice had been accepted. Smoke rose from the temple hearth, black with cedar and blood fat. Mothers clutched their sons tighter. Some families fell to the ground in grief, though none could ever be sure whose boy had gone. The priests issued a proclamation. The land has been cleansed. The heavens shine with approval. The gods have taken what was owed. Ritual actors would walk through the streets, singing hymns of transformation. He is not dead, they would cry. He has been lifted. Gold dust would be thrown into the air. Bread would be distributed to the poor. A feast might follow, paid for by the temple coffers, and all of it masked horror. The boy's body would never be returned. It was either buried in the temple crypt or burned in secret. No tomb, no epitaph, no grave for mourning. Yet mothers knew. They always knew. Some collapsed outside the temple gates, tearing their clothes and hair. Others turned to silent soul households, becoming still for weeks. Siblings stopped speaking. Fathers wandered into the desert. Grief was not punished, but it was not permitted. The priests demanded dignity. What the people were told was this: he was chosen, he was blessed. His pain has saved the city. The gods, they said, require innocence when the world is wounded. No one dared to say, we know only what the earth has allowed us to know. Much was never written. The rites were passed orally from priest to priest, bound by blood oaths and secrecy. But some fragments survived. Clay tablets, scorched but legible, were found in the ruins of Esagila, Nipper, and Borsippa. Some contain only brief notations, names, dates, glyphs for chosen or delivered. Others bear euphemistic titles: Tablets of the Vessel, Stare of Smoke, the Ash Oath. One tablet, now housed in the British Museum, describes the weeping of the bride and the cord of Marduk. Another, cracked in half, includes a sketch of a boy kneeling, hands bound, beneath a star chart. Priestly diarist rare but revelatory sometimes hint at deeper truths. One entry reads, "He would not stop bleeding. The stars turned red. I fear the omens will not hold." Archaeologists uncovered chambers beneath the temple, filled with child-sized sarcophagi and braziers marked with both astrological and anatomical symbols. The use of narcotics, the bindings, the patterns carved into bone point to something deliberate and across the region. In cities once rivaling Babylon, similar patterns emerge. In Uruk, Borsippa, even the distant ruins of Sippa, signs point to coordinated rites. The pain was not isolated. It was systemic. Still, much is lost. Priests erased what they feared would be misunderstood, and time has consumed the rest. Yet, the bones remain, scratched, marked, arranged in ways only ritual can explain. The rites did not die with Babylon. They mutated. In later centuries, whispers of Babylonian practices survived in Greek and Roman texts. Herodotus writes of virgin sacrifices among the Chaldeans, though he offers no detail. Early Hebrew scripture condemns Moloch worship and the passing of children through fire, likely distortions, but rooted in trauma. Persian invaders outlawed child rites, but stories persisted. Former temple slaves, boys who had escaped before selection, told tales that blurred memory and myth. Some became informants, some fled into monasteries. One carved images into the walls of a tomb near Susa, star maps, bleeding figures, and a god with no face. Folklore carried echoes in rural Mesopotamian villages. Lullabies warned children not to stare at the stars too long, lest they be seen. Boys were discouraged from bathing alone. Some wore amulets of copper and ashes said to confuse the gods, a Babylonian rhyme. Preserved orally for centuries, ends with a chilling refrain: "When the night is red, and the boy is pale, bind his hands, and tell no tale." Later celibacy cults across the Levant may also bear traces. The eunuch priesthoods of Cybele, the child servants of Artemis, each required male purity, but none were as silent, as total, as what Babylon demanded. Even burial customs shifted. In certain post-Babylonian sects, the dead were not allowed to face western direction associated with the sleeping vessels. To this day, in some Iraqi villages, adolescent boys are buried with special herbs, wormwood, mint, and dried lotus meant to ward off calling dreams. Trauma lingers. It migrates through generations, hides in architecture, survives in shadows cast by story, and what cannot be spoken. In the grandeur of Babylon, amid her walls of wonder and gardens of legend, something precious was always bleeding in silence. We admire the ziggurats, the mathematics, the astrology that foresaw eclipses centuries in advance, but we forget what was fed into those stars. We forget the children. The pain of a boy is easy to silence when wrapped in gold. His name is easy to burn when it lies on clay, and the gods, silent as they are, never weep. What do we lose when the innocent are swallowed by ceremony? We lose trust. We lose memory. We lose the ability to question when power calls itself holy. Today, we still build temples not of stone, but of law, of fame, of ideology, and still, beneath them, the small voices go unheard. This story is not only about Babylon, it is about us, because when we allow silence to protect sacred cruelty, when we trade pain for purity, and justify suffering as divine, we walk paths first laid in black stone beneath a city that worshipped order more than life. So listen closely. The earth still remembers, and if you press your ear to the ruins, you may hear a boy's breath, waiting in the dark. If this disturbed you, then, good. History should disturb us. If you want to hear more forgotten truths, subscribe, like, and let the dead speak through